cocaine addiction, a goal he scored with his fist and credited to God, criminal ties, public scandal, and a body destroyed by his own excess. Diego Maradona was a genius who fueled every fire that would eventually consume him, and yet, when he died, entire nations wept as though they'd lost family. How does a man shatter himself so completely and only become more beloved for it? That contradiction starts in a one-room shack in Villa Fiorito, where a 3-year-old kicked his first football on a dirt road. Something ignited that would never learn to stop. Villa Fiorito, on the southern edge of Buenos Aires, was a place where dreams had to fight for room. At 523 Amazor Street, a single room with a sheet metal roof and a clay floor sheltered the Maradona family, 8 children, 2 parents, and not enough space or money to go around. When rain turned the dirt roads to mud, the world shrank to that crowded shack and the struggle to stretch food for so many mouths. Don Diego, the father, worked days as a chemicals laborer, nights as a ferry driver, chasing shifts that barely kept hunger at bay. Doña Tota, the mother, quietly skipped her own meals, telling her children she had a stomachache so they could eat a little more. In this world, Diego was the 5th child, a wiry boy with wild hair the neighbors called Pelusa, the Fuzz. The first ball he ever owned came at age 3, a battered gift that instantly became his obsession. Before that, he made do with socks stuffed with rags, inventing his own game on the dusty patio outside the barbed wire gate. Football wasn't just a pastime here, it was escape, identity, and hope rolled into one. By age 8, he was already playing for Estrella Roja, outclassing older boys, desperate to win, to prove himself, to claw out of poverty by any means. Every sacrifice, every empty stomach, every muddy street carved into him a restless hunger, a belief that nothing would ever be enough. The hardship did not break him. It forged a will that would not yield, a drive that would later dazzle the world and eventually threaten to consume him. In Villa Fiorito, resilience and longing grew side by side, shaping a child who would never stop running, never stop wanting, and never truly feel safe from the shadows he left behind. Francisco Cornejo first spotted Diego on a battered pitch in Buenos Aires, where the ball seemed glued to the boy's feet. At 8, Diego's dribbling was already a spectacle. He weaved through crowds of older boys, his head up, body low, never losing control. Cornejo, unable to look away, invited him to Argentinos Juniors, a club with a reputation for shaping raw street talent into professional promise. Inside the academy, Diego's progress was electric. Coaches, used to precocious kids, found themselves outmatched by a child who played with the cunning of a veteran and the hunger of someone who knew what it meant to go without. But his gifts came with an edge. Diego's temper flared when calls went against him. He argued, sulked, sometimes stormed off. He wanted to win so badly that he bent rules before he even understood their purpose. Stories spread of him lying about his age to sneak into older age groups, 11-year-olds facing a 9-year-old who played as if he'd been sent to embarrass them. For Diego, the boundaries were always negotiable if victory was at stake. That fierce drive, the refusal to accept limits, made him impossible to ignore. Yet in every moment of brilliance, there was already a shadow, a willingness to break the rules, an emotional volatility that would follow him long after the world began to watch. At 16, Diego Maradona stepped onto the field for Argentinos Juniors, the youngest player ever in Argentina's top division. The crowd buzzed with curiosity, sensing history, but not yet the burden that would follow. Within months, he wore the blue and white of Argentina, debuting for the national team before most boys his age finished school. The country's hopes began to settle on his shoulders, expectations growing heavier with every touch, every dazzling run. But then came the blow that would shape him. In 1978, as Argentina prepared to host the World Cup, Maradona was left off the final squad. Coach Cesar Luis Menotti decided the teenager wasn't ready for the pressure of a nation in turmoil. Diego watched from home as his country lifted the trophy, the taste of exclusion burning deeper than any defeat. For him, it was not a lesson in patience, but a wound, a reminder that even genius could be denied. A year later, he answered with brilliance. In Japan, leading Argentina's youth team at the 1979 FIFA U20 World Cup, Maradona scored 6 goals and set up 4 more. He dominated the tournament, collecting the golden ball and returning home not as a prodigy, but as a savior in waiting. The press, the public, even his teammates began to treat his talent not as a gift, but as a promise to be kept. Argentina didn't just want Diego to succeed, they needed him to. Every goal, every headline, every new expectation pressed him further, turning the freedom of his game into a kind of national obligation. The boy from Villa Fiorito was now Argentina's greatest hope, and the weight of that hope was only beginning to show. In February 1981, the deal that sent Maradona to Boca Juniors for $4 million did more than shatter transfer records. It transformed him into a phenomenon that outgrew the game itself. Boca's blue and gold were more than colors. They were a badge of working-class pride, a direct line back to the hungry streets of Villa Fiorito. For the fans packed into La Bombonera, Diego wasn't just a player, he was their own, a boy who had made it out and now wore their dreams on his back. The city's adoration came fast and loud, and so did the rewards. Within months, Maradona's face appeared on billboards for Coca-Cola and Puma. The money poured in, and for the first time, he could buy anything he wanted. He did. Cars with tinted glass, gold chains heavy on his chest, and nights that bled into mornings at parties filled with music and smoke. The discipline that had carried him from dirt pitches to packed stadiums began to blur at the edges, lost in the rush of attention and applause. On the field, he played as if fueled by the roar of the crowd, but defeat brought a different energy. After losses, teammates and journalists whispered about Diego's disappearances, days when he'd vanish, unreachable, wrestling with moods that swung from wild joy to a silence that unsettled even those closest to him. Fame had cracked open his world, but the cracks ran both ways. Every celebration seemed to carry a shadow, every victory an aftertaste of something lost. The boy who had been shaped by scarcity now found himself surrounded by abundance, but the hunger inside him only grew more complicated. The world's most expensive footballer arrived in Barcelona in the summer of 1982, carrying a price tag that made him both a marvel and a target. 5 million euros changed hands for a 21-year-old whose talent seemed limitless, but whose body and mind were about to meet their first real limits. The city promised glamour and protection, a stage worthy of his gifts. Instead, Barcelona became the place where the ascent lost its innocence. Adapting to European football was a grind. Defenders closed in harder, the tactics were colder, and the spotlight more blinding than anything he'd known in Buenos Aires. The pressure to deliver on his record fee pressed in from every angle. Club directors, media, teammates, even the fans who had demanded his signing. The joy that once fueled his game now flickered under the weight of expectation. Then, in early 1983, his body faltered. Hepatitis B struck without warning, draining his strength and forcing him off the field for months. He watched from the sidelines as the season slipped away, powerless to change the outcome. When he returned, the sense of invincibility was gone, replaced by frustration and a new, unwelcome fragility. On September 24, 1983, everything changed again. Athletic Bilbao's Andoni Goicoechea lunged in with a tackle that snapped Maradona's left ankle. The sound, he later said, was like wood breaking. The injury was brutal. 3 months of recovery, endless pain, and the knowledge that his body could betray him at any moment. The club's medical care could mend bones, but not the growing sense of isolation or the anger that simmered beneath the surface. It was in these months, by Maradona's own later admission, that he first turned to drugs. The painkillers blurred into something stronger, a chemical escape that dulled both physical agony and emotional turmoil. Barcelona had promised a stage for greatness, but instead, it became the first place where pain and escape began to feed each other, setting in motion a cycle that would follow him for the rest of his life. In July 1984, Diego Maradona stepped off the plane in Naples to a roar unlike anything Europe had seen for a footballer. Napoli paid £6.9 million, the highest transfer fee in history, to bring him to a city starved for respect. Naples was Italy's perennial outsider, gripped by poverty, dismissed as backward by the wealthy North, and haunted by the shadow of organized crime. For generations, the South had served as a punchline for Milan and Turin. But in Maradona, Neapolitans saw more than a superstar. They saw a mirror, poor, proud, defiant, and desperate for dignity. He promised to be an idol for the children of the slums, just as he had been in Villa Fiorito. In his first press conference, he spoke to the city's poor directly, saying he wanted to give them hope, to show that someone from nothing could conquer the world. The city responded with a passion bordering on worship. Murals of Diego appeared overnight, candles burned beneath his image, and his jersey became a sacred object. He was not just a player, he was a living symbol of Southern resistance. On the pitch, the transformation was immediate. By the end of the 1986-87 season, Napoli, once a laughingstock, stood atop Serie A for the first time. The Scudetto was more than a trophy, it was a social revolution. Crowds filled the streets for days, chanting Maradona's name as if he had delivered the city from centuries of humiliation. The bond was emotional, political, and deeply personal, a communion between a wounded city and a man who carried its scars. In Naples, Diego Maradona was not just admired, he was canonized. Beneath the celebrations and the murals, Naples hid a labyrinth of danger that wrapped itself around Maradona as tightly as it embraced him. The Camorra, with its roots in the Forcella district, moved in the same circles that now counted Diego as their own. Court documents from the Tribunale di Napoli would later name Luigi Giuliano, a clan leader, as a friend and frequent companion. Nightclubs where Maradona held court doubled as drug distribution hubs, with cocaine flowing as freely as the champagne. The city's criminal underworld supplied the drugs, the parties, even the protection, blurring the lines between adulation and exploitation. His private life grew just as tangled. Affairs spilled into the open, paternity suits multiplied, and his marriage to Claudia Villafane strained under the weight of scandal. Financial chaos followed. Millions earned vanished into failed ventures, unpaid taxes, and the hands of those who saw opportunity in his chaos. The myth of Diego shielded him in public, but in private it left him exposed, surrounded by enablers, courted by criminals, and increasingly unable to separate loyalty from manipulation. As headlines shifted from his goals to his excesses, the legend that once lifted Naples began to suffocate the man at its center. June 22, 1986, Mexico City. The world watched as Argentina faced England, but for millions back home, the match was more than football. 4 years after the Falklands War, the wounds of defeat still stung. Maradona, now captain, carried that pain onto the pitch, his shoulders heavy with the hopes of a wounded nation. What happened next would define him forever. 6 minutes into the second half, Maradona darted into the box, chasing a loose ball. In a split second of cunning, he leapt and punched the ball past Peter Shilton. The referee missed the handball, and the goal stood. Maradona called it the hand of God, a phrase that captured both his audacity and his gift for myth-making. It was a trick, a rebellion against the rules, and for many Argentines, a sly form of payback. But for Maradona, the story was only half told. 4 minutes later, he picked up the ball in his own half. With a burst of energy, he slalomed past 5 English defenders, leaving them sprawled across the grass. He finished with a feint and a flick, the goal of the century. In just 11 seconds, he turned deceit into genius, shame into awe. The 2 goals, one illegal, one immortal, became the purest expression of his dual nature, the rule breaker and the artist, the street kid and the messiah. Maradona led Argentina to the World Cup title, lifting the trophy as the best player on the planet. In that moment, he was no longer just a footballer. He was a symbol, a global icon, and for a brief, blinding instant, he seemed larger than the game itself. The years after Mexico City did not bring peace. Each season, the collisions grew heavier, the bruises deeper. Maradona's ankles, already battered from years of relentless tackles, began to swell and ache after every match. Ligaments tore, bones chipped, and the pain never fully faded. Napoli's doctors prescribed cortisone injections and painkillers, patching him up for the next battle. Recovery became a race against the clock, never a true return to health. The body that once danced past defenders now moved with a stiffness that no magic could disguise. Off the field, the search for relief took a darker turn. Cocaine, first a tool for numbing pain and escaping pressure, became a nightly ritual. The lines between treatment and addiction blurred, each injury feeding the need for another fix. The nights grew longer, the mornings more desperate. Maradona's brilliance flickered, but the cost was mounting. Napoli's fortunes mirrored their captain's decline. The team that once stormed to titles began to unravel. Squad changes, mounting debts, and growing tension in the locker room. The city's adoration became tinged with worry. At the 1990 World Cup, Maradona led Argentina with a heavy limp and haunted eyes. He was still capable of moments of genius, but the old explosiveness was gone. The world watched as he fought through pain and scrutiny, each step a reminder that the legend was now more fragile than ever. In March 1991, the inevitable arrived. A routine drug test in Italy returned positive for cocaine. The Italian Football Federation suspended him for 15 months. For the first time, no amount of charisma or defiance could shield him. The chain reaction of injuries, self-medication, and mounting pressure had finally closed in, leaving Maradona isolated, stripped of his stage, forced to confront the consequences that had been gathering for years. Diego Maradona never chose the quiet exit. After the suspension in Italy, he returned to the game with the same stubborn fire, refusing to let scandal or age write his ending for him. Sevilla offered a lifeline in 1992, a club in transition, a league that still remembered his magic. He played 29 matches, scored 7 goals, and flashed moments of old brilliance, but the body that once danced through defenders now moved with effort. The contract lasted just a season. Unsettled, unpaid, Maradona walked away rather than fade into the background. Back home, Newell's old boys welcomed him like a prodigal son. Maradona arrived in Rosario in October 1993, captain's armband waiting, the press and fans desperate for one last miracle. His debut, a friendly against Emelec, ended in victory, a single goal, a brief surge of hope. But in the league, his impact faded. 5 appearances, no goals, and the familiar battle with injuries and fitness. The hunger was there, but the legs no longer answered the call. Still, he pushed for one final stage, the 1994 World Cup in the United States. Maradona led Argentina in the opening matches, scoring against Greece, eyes blazing with the old intensity. Then, after the win over Nigeria, a doping test returned positive for ephedrine. FIFA expelled him from the tournament. The image of Maradona, hand in hand with a nurse, leaving the field, became the closing scene of his international career. There was no grand farewell, only the silence of a genius whose will outlasted his body, a man who could not stop fighting, even when the game had already slipped away. Today, Maradona's shadow lingers over every conversation about greatness and self-destruction, proof that genius rarely arrives unaccompanied. In football's global spotlight, the pressure to be flawless grows fiercer with every generation. We keep idolizing imperfect heroes, knowing their brilliance and their ruin are often inseparable. Maybe what stirs us most is not perfection, but the fragile humanity behind the legend. What do you think? Can greatness ever come without a cost?